Hello, mic check. Hello, mic check. Hello, mic check.
खण्डन भाव बन्धन जगबन्धन वन्दित नीराजन नररूपधार नीराजन नररूपधार निर्गुण गुण माय मोत्थन अघदूषण जगभूषण चिद्घन आय ज्ञान जान विमल नयन ज्ञान जान विमल नयन वीक्षणे मोह जाय भाषार भाव सागर चिर उन्माद प्रेम पाथर भक्तार जान जुगाल चारण भक्तार जान जुगाल चारण तारान भाव जिम्भित जोगा ईशार जग देशार जोग सहाय नीर धन समाहित मान नीर धन समाहित मान निरखे तब कृपा জ্ঞান করুণা ঘন কর্ম প্রাণর পান জগত তারণ প্রাণর পান জগত তারণ কৃন্তান কলিড বাঞ্ছান কাম কাঞ্চন অতিনিন্দিত ইন্দ্রিয় রাগে সরহে নার বার ত্যাগে সরহে নার বার দেহ পাদে অনুরাগ নির্ভয় কাত সংশয় দৃঢ় নিশ্চয় মানস নিষ্কারণ ভাকত শরণ নিষ্কারণ ভাকত হরণ যে যাতে কুলমান সম্পদ তব শ্রীপদ ভাব গোষ্পদ পারে যা প্রেমার পান সম দর্শন প্রেমার পান সম দর্শন জগ জান দুঃখ যায় সম্পদ তব শ্রীপদ ভাব গোষ্পদ বারি প্রেমার্পণ সমুদর্শন প্রেমার্পণ সমুদর্শন জগ জন দুঃখ যায় নমো নমো প্রভু বাক মনাতে নমো নমো मन वचन आधार प्रभु मन वचन आधार जो तेरा जाते उजल हृदय कंदर जो तेरा जाते उजल हृदय कंदर तुमी तम भंजनहार प्रभु तुमी तम भंजनहार नमो नमो प्रभु बाकमनातीत नमो नमो प्रभु बाकमनातीत मन वचनैकाधार प्रभु मन वचनैकाधार ज्योतिरजते जल हृदि कंदर ज्योतिरजते जल हृदि कंदर तुमी तम भंजर आहार प्रभु तुमी तम भंजर आहार धीरे धिलंग रंग भंग बाजे अंग संग मृदंग धीरे धिलंग रंग भंग बाजे अंग संग मृदंग गाइছে ছন্দ ভকত বৃন্দ আরতি তোমার গাইছে ছন্দ ভকত বৃন্দ আরতি তোমার জয় জয় আরতি তোমার হর হর আরতি তোমার শিব শিব আরতি তোমার খণ্ডন পাব বন্ধন জগ বন্দন বন্দিত মায় জয় শ্রী गुरु महाराज की जय। ओं ह्रीं ऋतं तम चलो गुणजित गुणेभ्यः नाक्तं तेवां सकरुणं तव पादपद्मं मोहाङ्कषां बहुकृतं न भजे जतोऽहं तस्मात् त्वमेव शरणं मम दीनबन्धो भक्तिर्भगश्च भजनं भवभेदकारे गच्छन्तलं सुविपुलं गमनाय तत्त्वम् वक्त्रधृतोऽपि न मे भाति किञ्चित् तस्मात् त्वमेव शरणं मम दीनबन्धो तेजस्तरन्ते तरसा त्वयि तृप्ततृष्णा रागे कृते ऋतपथे त्वयि रामकृष्णे मर्तामृतं तव पदं मरणोर्विनाशं तस्मात् त्वमेव शरणं मम दीनबन्धो कृत्यं करोति कलुषं कुहकान्तकारी स्नान्तं शिवं सुविमलं तव नामो नाथ यस्मादहं त्वशरणो जगदेकगम्य तस्मात् त्वमेव शरणं मम दीनबन्धो ॐ स्थापकाय च धर्मस्य सर्वधर्मस्वरूपिणे अवतारवरिष्ठाय रामकृष्णाय ते नमः। ॐ नमो श्री भगवते रामकृष्णाय नमो नमः। ॐ नमो श्री भगवते रामकृष्णाय नमो नमः। ॐ नमो श्री भगवते रामकृष्णाय नमो नमः। ॐ सर्वमङ्गल मङ्गले शिवे सर्वार्थसाधिके शरण्ये त्र्यम्बके गौरी नारायणी नमोस्तुते। सृष्टि स्थिति विनाशानां शक्ति भूते सनातने गुणाश्रये गुणमये नारायणे नमोस्तुते। शरणागत दीनार्त परित्राण परायणे सर्वशार्ते हरे देवी नारायणी नमोस्तुते। जय 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 महामाई की जय। जय भगवान श्री राम कृष्ण देव की जय। जय स्वामी जी महाराज की जय।
Namashri Yatirajaya Vivekananda Sure Satchit Sukhaswarupaya Swamine Tapaharine. Alright, so we are nearing the finish of this first lecture, The Necessity of Religion. And just to recall for you the thread that we were trying to explore, this lecture started with exploring the two roots of what we call the religious urge in man. One, ancestor worship. Two, nature worship. From that, Vivekananda extracted this, what he called the attempt to transcend senses, or equivalently, an attempt to discover the infinite as part and parcel of one's own being. This was one. The first step in this lecture was this. The second was essentially arguing against the statement that religion is a social construct, which means it's to say that it's a social construct is to put the cart before the horse. It is the social construct is a consequence of the constitution of human beings, and it's human beings that construct society, and therefore there are social structures which support some particular way of making this religious instinct fructify. And therefore, he extracted from this the statement that the essential part of the religious urge in man, or what we call religion today, is not the social construct, but something that is constitutional in man. So these first two parts of the lecture were trying to point a finger about the direction in which we need to go in order to extract what exactly is the core religious instinct in all human beings. And at this stage of the lecture, he is coming out with what it is. In some sense, so far it was what it is not really. Yeah, I mean, there is some truth in the social construct, there is some truth in the historical perspective, but that is not the essential part, and the essential part is what he is talking about now. Yeah. So let's start. And so he was basically saying that there are two aspects, again, the two reasons to really study religion as a science, as a study. Yeah? One, because it actually brings us knowledge. This is the core point of it is two. One, it brings us knowledge, it brings us joy. Yeah, so the core aspirations of human beings, as we had discussed last time, joy, existence, or eternality, and a notion of eternality, and knowledge. Yeah, so joy, knowledge, and eternality. Yeah, so these two particular themes, joy and knowledge, are going to be extracted out of this and put forward as the crystallized essence of the religious urge. So he ended this statement, ended the previous thing by saying that as far as the spiritual plane is concerned, this is something that brings a certain joy, which is part and parcel of our being, and it is not dependent on any external criteria. So a kind of permanent joy, which is part and parcel of our being. This is one of the objects of this inquiry of religion, bereft of its limiting adjuncts. One. Second, it also gives us a certain knowledge, a certain power over nature, both external and internal. The internal nature, as he said, which means what guides our minds, what guides the passions, the senses, etc., etc. What is it in us that manifests through what we call the mind? So far, by and large, this has been within the domain of religious inquiry, not in any other domain. So, it gives rise to knowledge, it gives rise to joy. And let's start. And therefore, it is something that brings a considerable amount of power. Knowledge immediately manifests itself as power when we learn to control various aspects of our mind. Similarly, if a person has his or her joy within, external circumstances will cease to control him or her to that that extent, which means one will not be dependent on external circumstances. Again, this is translating to a certain amount of power over oneself. So, and he continues, he concludes the previous part by saying, thus religion as a study seems to me to be absolutely necessary. And he continues, we can see it in its effects. It is the greatest motive power that moves the human mind. No other ideal can put into us the same mass of energy as the spiritual. So far as human history goes, it is obvious to all of us that this has been the case and that its powers are not dead. I do not deny that men on simply utilitarian grounds can be very good and moral. There have been many great men in this world, perfectly sound, moral and good, simply on utilitarian grounds. But the world movers, men who bring, as it were, a mass of magnetism into the world, whose spirit works in hundreds and in thousands, whose life ignites others with a spiritual fire, such men we always find have that spiritual background. Their motive power came from religion. Religion is the greatest motive power for realizing that infinite energy which is the birthright and nature of every man. Here he comes to the essence of it. I'll come back to this. Let's finish this paragraph. In building up character, in making for everything that is good and great, in bringing peace to others and peace to one's own self, religion is the highest motive power, studied from that standpoint. From which standpoint? From the standpoint of a power that brings peace to others and peace to one's own self. Religion must be studied on a broader basis than formerly. All narrow, limited, fighting ideas of religion have to go. All sect ideas and tribal or national ideas of religion must be given up. That each tribe or nation should have its own particular God and think that every other is wrong is a superstition that should belong to the past. All such ideas must be abandoned. And this is again saying what it is not and what it is. Again, it's moving towards a certain universal aspect, a deeper analysis, emphasizing the analytical aspect of this religious urge to decipher what exactly is true about it. If there is a set of beliefs which is shared by a particular community, which can be as small as an individual or a family or a sect or a tribe or a nation, but if it is not true across the board, across all human beings that exist, through a certain measure of discipline, if universally any person anywhere in the world is not able to is able to contradict, say, some claim coming from some particular sect or nation, well, it just means that that is not part and parcel of the human constitution, ergo, it's false. It could be valid in terms of some kind of a temporary construct which is relevant to a particular society for a particular time. It is not true as a scientific truth about the constitution of human beings, which is why he emphasizes this. All sect ideas and tribal or national ideas of religion must be given up. That each tribe or nation should have its own particular God and think that every other is wrong is a superstition, and that should belong to the past. All such ideas have to be abandoned. This is the negative part of it. What is the positive part of it? Religion is the greatest motive power for realizing that infinite energy which is the birthright and nature of every man. So we are progressing towards a much deeper and broader understanding of what we usually understand by religion. Yeah, so usually these things are limited by the particular societies in which we are born and particular beliefs which we have somehow unconsciously gathered through our lives without examination. Yeah. Swami Ranganathananda, one of our former presidents, used to keep differentiating between these two aspects. One is called matam, opinion. The other is called tattvam or truth. Yeah. A scientific truth is not dependent on your opinion. Whether the force of gravity exists and is going to pull a massive body towards another massive body. For example, some object allowed to fall will be attracted to the earth. Yeah. This is what gravity does. It does not care whether somebody thinks it's going to happen or somebody thinks that it's not going to happen. It is something that happens because of its own nature. Explanation from within a system, from within the nature of the way the natural world functions. That is what science is about. And really, this internal science, the science of the spirit. I mean, usually when we hear the word spirituality, there's some kind of baggage associated with it. It typically means some kind of religious observance, but that's a very superficial aspect of it. The real part of it is something that is related literally to the spirit of human beings, which means the essential nature of all human beings, something which anybody can partake of. It's not limited to some privileged group of individuals belonging to some particular kind of privileged class or belonging to some particular group of people sharing some kind of religious beliefs. That has nothing to do with the essential core of what religion is about. Yeah? And therefore, this is the universality and depth towards which Vivekananda is going. So typically, we usually think of something, if something is very broadly true, universally true, it should be something that starts lacking depth. That's absolutely, that's a wrong way of thinking. See, what we are trying to do is trying to observe phenomena in the internal world that is there across people, and trying to find that which is unifying, that which is common to so many diverse subjective phenomena. What is universal in the subjective human experience? That's the quest. Yes? And the more the data that you are unifying, the deeper the truths that you are getting at. And in one place, Vivekananda describes Ramakrishna as, this is the person in whom this religious urge simultaneously attained tremendous depth and tremendous breadth. That individual life was there in front of him, and therefore he could say that this kind of depth and breadth simultaneously is something that can be aspired for and achieved. Yeah? Typically, when we say that some person has some kind of deep religious longing, and it's often mixed up, and this is something that he is going to critique a little later, it's mixed up with negative human emotions. What are they? Fear, hatred. Fear means fear of the other. Hatred means hatred of the other. And somehow, I shut off from my consciousness. There's this group of people which is the other, who are different from me because I have a certain label and these people have a certain other label. And since they are the other, I hate them or I am afraid of them. Which means that I am limiting myself, I am declaring unto myself that I am not going to investigate something that is common to what I call the other. It's essentially saying that no, I am not interested in that. That is something that is outside my domain of enquiry. Which means I am putting a certain bond on myself. Nobody else to blame for that. Yeah? And this sectarianism, it's got biological roots It has nothing very fancy about it. We try to glorify it and start saying that it is some kind of tradition. Tradition has two aspects to it. And we don't analyze the positive aspect from the negative aspect and try to keep it as this confusion between that which is positive about it, that which is negative about it. Why? Why is it historical or biological? At a certain point of time, human beings moved around in small tribes. In order to preserve that entity, that existence as a small tribe, its identity had to be preserved by saying that, okay, there is this deity which looks over us, and therefore this deity is going to kill off anybody who tries to harm this particular tribe. Similarly, the tribe that's fighting this tribe, some new other tribe will have its own deity, and then they'll say, okay, this tribe's deity is stronger than that tribe's deity. This is at a certain level very immature, completely nonsensical. Yeah. Because what we are after is what is true, not what is belief. Somebody can believe something which might be true, which might be untrue. That is what is called matam, or what Ranganathanji used to call matam. Yeah. And in Vedanta literature, this is also explained in Sanskrit in slightly different language. It's something about which kartum akartum anyatha kartum shakyate. This is the technical language, which means when there is an injunction, you can follow that injunction. You can not follow that injunction. You can oppose that injunction. Yeah, you can either follow, that means obey, or disregard, or actively disobey. This is what beliefs are about. But when something is true, what you do about it is not going to affect it at all. So, for example, the earth has, say, diameter, or say has circumference or something like 40,000 kilometers or something like that. Does it really matter whether somebody has that opinion or does not have that opinion? It's a fact. And this kind of objective truths about the subjective human experience, universal, if that becomes paradoxical, think of what is the universal truth about the subjective human experience. That's what one is after here. And so, sectarian ideas, which really go back to these sort of primitive human beings, where we used to live in tribes. Now we have larger tribes, we call it a nation. Yeah. This history of the notion of a nation state, it's barely 400 years old. Yeah. It's not too far back. It's some kind of a stage in human evolution where this political state has come into being. But the intrinsic nature of human beings is common across the world. And so, that is the data from which we'll have to extract what is true across the board. That is our raw data, and we'll have to distill that into a unifying piece of knowledge. And he expands on that. As the human mind broadens, its spiritual steps broaden too. The time has already come when a man cannot record a thought without its reaching to all corners of the earth. By merely physical means, we have come into touch with the whole world. So the future religions of the world have to become as universal as wide. Why? So here there is a certain, again, there are sort of biological roots for this evolution of human beings. I think I had mentioned some days back that there was this David Attenborough serial about how species evolved, life of mammals, I think, as far as I remember. So in primates, which is the sort of broader group of animals to which human beings belong, as you see an increase in the brain size, it's directly proportional to the number of members of a group, which means the number of people that are there in your group, which one regards as this expanded I. This is my group. Yeah? The number of individuals who can work in harmony as one consolidated unit. one organic unit, this number is directly proportional to the size of the human brain, size of the primate brain. And the human brain is the largest amongst that. And so what has happened is that the brain is capable as a biological statement. This is, I'm just saying something that is, what can that brain do? It can take different members of this tribe, map it within, and construct internally a structure which says this is the larger I, what we call the we. Yeah. And today what has happened, because of this information revolution, we essentially have started saying that, okay, here are these human beings in this country or that country, but they're all human beings. And we now have this larger narrative, larger statement of identifying oneself as a human being, as a part and parcel of the human race. It does not stop there. Why is there so much concern about things which affect the environment today? About, say, global warming, about species dying out. A huge number of species have died out over the last 50 years. The human population has exploded, maybe probably become a factor of 5 times over the last century, or a little more than that. So essentially what is one doing here? One is realizing that this is the one planet we have, and I as an individual, I'm going to live for some more years than I'm going to pass off. But what is the world that we'll pass on to the next generation? Which means one's concerns are embracing this larger existence. Not just the human species, but other species and the earth in general. Why is that happening? Because our brains have this capacity to map this external world within and regard it as something about which one is concerned. Yeah. As soon as I say, okay, this is something I am concerned about, what is happening is that the I is extending, is expanding. So just yesterday, let me share an anecdote with you. What exactly is this expansion about? Yeah. We have various terms for it. We use these terms almost as if, from memory, but they mean something. So, for example, again, this is an anecdote about Swami Ranganathananda. This is, he used the word Atma Vikas. So, what exactly is it? Which means, how far has the person expanded his being? And he was supposed to give a lecture to little children, school children. And this man is accustomed to talking about the Upanishads, about Vivekananda. But how is he going to communicate that message to little children from school? And what does he do? He says, okay, so let me ask you. So you call 2 children and say that here is a basket of mangoes. Yeah. And then ask one child to come up, and that child comes up, takes up one mango, cuts it, washes it, cuts it, eats it, and goes away. Another child comes up and then asks, can I distribute it amongst all the children? So he washes it, prepares it for everybody. It's essentially obvious. Whose being has expanded. It's essentially saying that I am not limited. The second child is basically saying that I am not limited to this psychophysical being, this particular body. My concerns have extended beyond those boundaries, and whoever is around, one shares in their concerns. This is exactly what it is about. It's in some sense something very common sense, something that we see in our day-to-day life. And this sharing in the concerns of other people, of other beings, of this whole world, is really what this expansion of I is about. And can that be really objectified in terms of what we superficially understand as physical science? No. On the other hand, if we try to understand the understand this as a science of the human spirit, then indeed it is the case that this is part and parcel of the quote-unquote religious urge, bereft of the limiting adjuncts that we put on it in terms of social limitations. Let's carry on. So now he is basically saying where this religious urge is going to take human beings to, or where it ought to take human beings to, whether we like it or not. What has happened is that the world has become unified, and therefore the little pieces of violence that we see between one group of people and another group of people, by the very nature of the species and its growth, it cannot survive. Why? Because it's basically saying, I am other than another human being, which is a false statement. And essentially, this kind of falsehood can survive only so long as this evolutionary leftover from when we were tribes, from when we were animals, continues influencing us. The less it influences us, the more human beings are going to unify, because at some level it's going to be forced on us. There is this one planet, and if in order to make sure that I as an individual survive, it's essential that this whole species survives. Therefore, this kind of fear and hatred engendering certain kind of sectarian religious instincts cannot survive, basically because it's based on falsehood. That's what it's moving towards. And here, this understanding, this analytical understanding and shaping our life according to it is where the rest of the lecture is headed. So, which means he's basically prognosticating what is the evolution of religion in years to come. The religious ideals of the future must embrace all that exists in the world and is good and great, and at the same time have infinite scope for future development. All that was good in the past must be preserved, and the doors must be kept open for future additions to the already existing store. Religions must also be inclusive and not look down with contempt upon one another because their particular ideals of God are different. And now, I think he's just about to make a pretty drastic statement. He essentially is about to say that, people who claim to be atheists and are perfectly sensible are not excluded from the domain of religion in this particular sense. Even in India, the Jain religion actually does not believe in a personal God at all. Buddhism is agnostic about it. But we call these Indian religions, right? So one is atheistic, one is agnostic, but that has not prevented them from qualifying as religions in this much broader sense. And he expands, in my life, I have seen a great many spiritual men, a great many sensible persons who did not believe in God at all. That is to say, not in our sense of the word. Perhaps they understood God better than we can ever do. So, somebody claiming that he does not believe in a personal God is not excluded from this ambit. Apparently, of the 7+ billion people in the world today, approximately 1.2 billion or more do not subscribe to any organized religion. Yeah? So what, are they excluded? They are not excluded from the human species. So why should they be excluded from the pall of what is essentially the religious urge? All of them have it. It's just that they don't give it this connotation of a social construct. So it's really broadening out to include the whole human species. The personal idea of God, or the impersonal, the infinite, moral law, or the ideal man, these all have to come under the definition of religion. And when religions have become thus broadened, their power for good will have increased 100-fold. So what is the point here? It's only when it's broadened and encompasses and embraces the whole species and beyond that the power for good, which is what religions claim they do and often end up not doing it, it's only after this expansion that the power for good really becomes pronounced. As I said, what exactly, when do we call a person good? Person is, and the definition is goodness. We had discussed this. Yeah? Truth, beauty, and goodness are equivalently in the Sanskrit language Sat Chit Ananda. So this Sat aspect, existence aspect, person who can identify his existence with the existence of many others. That's what we call good in day-to-day language. Yeah. So the power for good, almost by definition, therefore, will come from religious ideas breaking these boundaries and trying to identify itself with the concerns of humanity at large. And he says, what is the flip side? If we don't do that, religions, having tremendous power in them, have often done more injury to the world than good, simply on account of their narrowness and limitations. Which basically says, okay, this is exactly what we were emphasizing a moment back, saying that so and so group of people is the other. Which means I am trying to legitimize either my hatred or my fear of a certain group of people. This has nothing whatsoever to do with the core religious urge. That's what Vivekananda said. Even at the present time, we find many sects and societies with almost the same ideas fighting each other. Fighting each other, why? Because one does not want to set forth those ideas in precisely the same way as another. So really, what is it about? It's a very superficial difference. Most of the people who fight each other based on, say, some kind of a so-called religious identity, it's because of certain labels. Finally, it boils down to certain names. I call something by the name X, somebody else calls it by the name Y, and therefore we fight. No, X is the right thing, no, Y is the right thing. It is ridiculous. Yeah? So this is what is being critiqued here. Therefore, religions will have to broaden. Religious ideas will have to become universal, vast, and infinite. And then alone we shall have the fullest play of religion. For the power of religion has only just begun to manifest in the world. Only just begun to manifest. Can you think about it? I mean, these traditional religions, what we call organized religions, have been existing for probably thousands of years. And this is in 1900, around that time. He's saying they are just beginning to manifest, which means that what he is calling the true religious spirit is not what organized religion is about, not sects, but the core religious urge which is universal in human beings. It is sometimes said that religions are dying out, that spiritual ideas are dying out of the world. To me, it seems that they have just begun to grow. The power of religion, broadened and purified, is going to penetrate every part of human life. So long as religion was in the hands of a chosen few or of a body of priests, it was in temples, churches, books, dogmas, ceremonials, forms, and rituals. But when we come to the real spiritual universal concept, then and then alone, religion will become real and living. It will come into our very nature, live in our every movement, penetrate every pore of our society, and be infinitely more a power for good than it has ever been before. Again, the emphasis being on broadening and essentially saying that not the sectarian fighting ideas of what these superficial constructs which really tried to put it to and say that only something that is restricted to some temple, some church, some dogma, some belief, without analysis, is what religion is about. Basically say, throw all that stuff away, go to the core part of it, and once you get to that core, essentially you will see that what you're calling by some labels A, B, C is exactly what another person is calling by labels X, Y, Z. What is needed is a fellow feeling between the different types of religion, seeing that they all stand or fall together. A fellow feeling which springs from mutual esteem and mutual respect, and not the condescending, patronizing, niggardly expression of goodwill, unfortunately in vogue at the present time with many. Which basically, what is the point? Oh yeah, we believe everything is fine, but somehow we are superior. This is somehow or the other sneaking in one's own superiority and failing to recognize that the other person's core belief, if you remove these encrustations and one's own core ideas, in their essence are the same. It's failing to recognize that and focusing on much more superficial aspects. That's what gives rise to some of this patronizing, what Vivekananda calls patronizing, niggardly expression of goodwill, unfortunately in vogue at the present time with many. And now he comes to his final statement. And above all, this is needed between types of religious expression coming from the study of mental phenomena, unfortunately even now laying exclusive claim to the name of religion. So essentially again, the scientific study of mental phenomena, how does our mind function, how do thoughts arise, how do emotions manifest, what passions drive us, what are our core motivating principles. These are internal things, and this analysis has typically been done in only what, unfortunately, even now laying exclusive claim to the name of religion. Yeah. This on the one hand, and what? And those expressions of religion whose heads, as it were, are penetrating more into the secrets of heaven, though their feet are clinging to the earth. I mean the so-called materialistic sciences. Essentially, what is he saying here? He's saying that the so-called, what we call the religious urge in human being and what we call the scientific urge in human being, they are really the same. Why? Because the scientific urge at the core of it is a desire to find out the truth about nature, independent of personal biases, independent of personal prejudices. This quest for truth above everything else, crystallized, independent of whether it's internal, what used to be called the religious urge, or external, what is called the science, is really something, this is something that we should note, that Vivekananda identifies the core urge in human beings to decide, to find out what truth is, as basically a religious urge. Why should we follow? There is a certain irrational, I won't say irrational, an irrational or urge in human beings, a core, something that's part and parcel of our being, that drives us to strive for truth above everything else. And that could be in nature, that nature could be both external or internal. And it's really at that level that the scientific urge in human beings to find truth in nature and the urge of human beings to find what is universal in the subjective being, so-called religion, really gets unified. And what needs to be done in order to have this harmony? And that he puts forward in the last bit of this lecture. To bring about this harmony, both will have to make concessions, sometimes very large, nay more, sometimes painful. But each will find itself the better for the sacrifice and more advanced in truth. And in the end, the knowledge which is confined within the domain of time and space will meet and become one with that which is beyond them both, where the mind and senses cannot reach, the absolute, the infinite, the one without a second. At this stage, I don't think there is any point in further explanation. So let me just read this last bit again and we'll finish. Above all, this is needed between types of religious expression coming from the study of mental phenomena, unfortunately even now laying exclusive claim to the name of religion, and those expressions of religion whose heads, as it were, are penetrating more into the secrets of heaven, though their feet are clinging to earth. I mean the so-called materialistic sciences. Again, two things. In both cases, there are qualifiers that he's using. Study of subjective or mental phenomena, unfortunately even now laying exclusive claim to the name of religion. And when he comes to sciences, he says so-called materialistic sciences. Yeah. So, the so-called materialistic sciences are not materialistic. That is the implication, A. And the study of mental phenomena it's unfortunate that has laid claim to the word religion. Yeah. So basically, both these are studies. If we just remove these words from that, materialistic as an adjective for sciences and study of mental phenomena, remove the word religion from it, what we are doing is trying to aspire for truth. And in order to do that, what happens? He says, concludes with this, to bring about this harmony, both will have to make concessions, sometimes very large, nay more, sometimes painful. But each will find itself the better for the sacrifice and more advanced in truth. And in the end, the knowledge, which is confined within the domain of time and space, will meet and become one with that which is beyond them both, where the mind and senses cannot reach the absolute, the infinite, the one without the second. Om Shanti 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 Hari Om Tat Sat Shri Ramakrishna Math. Next time we will start the next lecture, the real nature of man.